meat, salt, and water, right? I mean, look, guys, I think at the heart of it, it really is that simple, right? Humans are, by definition, hypercarnivores, okay? And when you move back into what is a species-specific diet, yeah, it can be just that easy. However, if I've learned anything from my own experience, as well as the questions I get every day from you guys, it's that it doesn't always seem to be so simple. Like, it doesn't seem to pan out so effortlessly, all right? So my intention for this video is to basically just put together the most comprehensive carnivore diet adaptation beginner's guide that I can, all right? I'm really gonna explore every nuance, turn over every rock, and hopefully provide the answers to all your questions, all right? But before we get started, let me quickly just roll the meat clip. Forgive me, guys. I just find that my videos tend to get a lot better viewer attention when I put those aesthetic montages of meat at the start. So sue me. I'm doing it for the views. Anyways, if you're anything like me, you have understood the efficacy of this diet. You've realized, wow, I need to eat like a human is meant to eat. Screw plants, they're just trying to kill me anyways, right? And now you're, diving down the rabbit hole of YouTube videos, trying to learn more about these questions that just seem to always come up.
Questions that need answering.
In this video, I'm gonna draw on everything I've learned from my own personal experience, as well as what I've learned from other incredible humans in this field. And you'll recognize some of the names that I bring up, all right? I'm really just standing on the shoulders of giants here. Like this, it's such a weird concept, right? To be retaught how to eat. This is ancestral dietary knowledge that in theory should be passed down generationally, but it's been lost, all right? So people like myself, as well as these other phenomenal humans that are uncovering these truths, we're really just trying to bring it back into light. This is what it means to be a human, okay? And just quickly, like, this video isn't about me, but given that I am gonna draw on my own experience, I guess I should give you a little background on myself. If I bring up some videos, almost 6 months ago now, I was just in a really bad place. You can see I was really malnourished. I'd been on a plant-based diet for a long time. It wasn't working for me. And it sounds a bit cliche to say that this diet saved my life, but it was certainly a big piece of the puzzle to bring me back to just to have a will to live again, all right? So it's been incredible. Okay, so there you have it. Now, before I get started on the main girth of this video, all right, I just wanna address one kind of preliminary question. And that's, why should this be so difficult? Why should this be hard at all? Surely if this is our species-specific diet, then it should be effortless. We should move back into this way of eating with no problems whatsoever. Life is good. And my answer to this is that, honestly, it can be, all right? It really is just as easy as eating meat and associated fats intuitively, drinking water, and salting your food to taste, if you like, okay? But I think there's three main reasons that crop up as to why this just doesn't seem to always be the case, okay? Number one is that even if you've understood the potential of this diet, the potential of your body when you give it what it wants, it's still very hard to shake off the social conditioning that we've all been indoctrinated with for our entire lives, okay? Like, some people might start carnivore but still be limiting their calories, think, I can't eat and fully indulge because I'll get fat and ugly, all right? Or people have been known to cut the fat off their meat. Like, this is an absolute sacrilegious practice. It is ludicrous to think of someone doing that, These are biases that are stuck in our head from these indoctrinated belief systems that we've absorbed. And sometimes it just takes a bit of understanding and letting go of these ideas to be able to eat intuitively again without those biases, right? Number two is that likely however old you are is how long your body has been making adaptations or been adapted to metabolizing the wrong fuel source, that being carbohydrates. Okay, so when you're a baby drinking your mom's breast milk, you are actually in a fat-burning, ketogenic, natural human metabolic state, right? And then when you shift into carbs, your body has to adapt to this wrong fuel source. And so however many decades old you are now is how long your body has had to be living in that adaptation, okay? So to adapt back, it takes time, right? Like you got to think how brilliant Mother Nature is at managing her resources, and our bodies, like we are Mother Nature, okay? A great example of this and how your organ systems are going to reprioritize depending on the factors in your life and how you're using it is the gallbladder. I'm pretty sure it's up there as the top. It might even be the #1 surgery in America, the removal of the gallbladder, right? And why is this relevant? I'm getting to it. Okay, so the gallbladder is this little organ that's specifically tasked with secreting bile to emulsify fat, right? And because we've been kind of conned into this belief that we need to be eating a low-fat diet throughout most of the world, everyone has this belief. You go to the grocery store, everything is lean chicken breast, lean ground beef. Ugh, no one wants lean stuff, all right? And so what happens is the body says, okay, we have this organ just for emulsifying fat, but we're not eating any fat. So it's so clever, and I don't know exactly what it looks like, but I assume it shrivels up. It atrophies to the point where it becomes problematic because it's just not useful at all, and then we get it removed. That's how smart the body is at reprioritizing the organ systems of our digestive metabolic system, okay? And so when you move back into this diet, you have to give your body a bit of a grace period and understand that, yeah, just because this is natural doesn't mean we can go overnight. It's been decades that your body's been on the other side of the spectrum. The pendulum is now swinging back to, I don't know, that was a stupid analogy. Okay, and the third point is, what was it? Let me see. The third point is just that we're all coming to this diet from unique health holes, I will call them. We have unique degeneration in our bodies. And the sad truth is that while it's amazing that people are rediscovering this diet, the sad thing is that most people are coming here because they're so ill, myself included. I started this looking for answers, and a lot of people do. So whether you were plant-based for years and are horribly undernourished, or maybe you are overweight or underweight or have some sort of autoimmune condition, these things that are becoming so common in our world today, we're all gonna have a unique experience and kind of go through a unique journey moving back into this way of eating and experience unique symptoms, have unique questions, all the likes, okay? And the last thing I'll say before I wrap up this incredibly convoluted intro is the one thing you guys are gonna hear me say over and over again over the course of this video is that you need to strengthen your intuition, okay? You need to listen to the feedback that your body is giving you, right? When you move back into what is natural for us to eat, like all animals eating their natural diet, you can start to eat with that intuition, all right? Our palate says that is a good flavor. I want more of that. You just give your body what it wants. And the longer that you eat in this manner on this optimal human diet, the stronger your intuition is going to become, all right? So you're just going to learn to lean into that, all right? And as I go through all these questions, like just keep in mind that these are really only guidelines, okay? And at the end of the day, you need to apply this knowledge to your current situation and the feedback that your own body is giving you, okay? I can't give you the answers to what your specific body needs. I can just give you the rough understanding of this basic knowledge, okay? Okay, without further ado, thanks for sticking with me. Let's get into it. Okay, so the first topic that I want to discuss is how to actually begin this diet, how to step into it. And the two sides of this coin here are basically, do I go cold turkey, overnight, screw plants, get out of my life? Or do you do a more gradual approach, over the course of a few weeks or even a few months, all right? And the reason I've included this first in the video, I mean, I guess logically it makes sense, but I think there's the most potential here for people to have problems and kind of a bit of turmoil down the line if you do this in a more reckless way. Okay, so what I'm going to say may surprise you, but my strong recommendation here is to adapt slowly, adapt over time. And it's not for the reasons that you might think. So yes, as I mentioned at the start of this video, our metabolic system needs time to make these adaptations, these shifts in where it's placing its energy. Our gallbladder needs to strengthen, and for the record, if you don't have a gallbladder, you can still operate well on a carnivore diet. I'll dive into that nuance a little later. Maybe that's why you're watching this video. But yeah, it's not actually for that reason. You would think it might be, but our body's gonna make these adaptations and back to a fat burning metabolism, regardless of if we go slow or fast. It might make the keto flu a little bit less potent at the start, but it's not a big deal, okay? The reason I'm offering this suggestion is actually because of our gut microbiome, okay? And I do want to point out that very little is understood about the gut microbiome, okay? It's like the bottom of the ocean, all right? We know more about outer space than our gut microbiome. But what we do know is this: there are trillions of little microorganisms in our gut that are tasked with further breaking down the remnants of what makes it through our upper digestion, okay? And what is clear is that these microorganisms that we're basically farming in our large intestine mainly, they are a direct reflection of what we're actually putting in our mouth, meaning that there's unique species whose job it is to further break down each individual style of foodstuffs that we're putting in our mouth, okay? So basically what happens is if you were to go cold turkey, you will start eating a high animal-based diet. That's great. You're gonna feel great. It tastes delicious. Oh my God, awesome. And new gut bacteria are gonna proliferate that are, the direct reflection of meat and are gonna be able to break down what gets through the upper digestion, okay? Which is actually gonna be a lot less because we actually absorb more of meat when we eat it because there isn't waste like plant fiber, okay? But now what's gonna happen is the gut bacteria that favored the plant matter, their food source is gone, okay? So while they're gonna largely die off, what seems to happen is you gotta think they're a living organism and they don't wanna die. So it seems that they can just cause a bit of grief in your gastrointestinal system. They can eat into your intestinal lining, trying to survive. And this can manifest in a variety of symptoms right away, or even weeks or months down the road, all right? So in my own experience, I was gung-ho, I went cold turkey, and I had a little keto flu, and then the first 6 weeks, I felt keto flu for a week or two, and then I just felt amazing till about 5 or 6 weeks in. And then I just started to get these kind of gut symptoms. I started to get this tension, this inflammation. I started to get loose stools again. And I had to do a series of fasts to allow my gut biome to kind of reset, reheal, reseal. So what I recommend is something that I got from Professor Bart Kay, and I think it makes a lot of sense. And it's basically having your plant matter half every week, right? So when you first start shifting into this diet, just cut your plants in half. Then every subsequent week, cut it in half again until around 5 or 6 weeks, you'll pretty much have a nominal amount left and you'll just cut it out. And what this does is it allows the plant favoring gut bacteria to slowly diminish in size while still having a viable food source, so that when you finally do cut it off at the very end, there's gonna be a much smaller population, and likely there's not gonna be enough quantity to cause any problems, and you're gonna have a smooth transition, okay? So now I do wanna point out that there's no guarantee of this happening, of yourself having a problem down the road because you went cold turkey. But I just think it's better to be safe than sorry, okay? For example, some people may have said they went cold turkey, but what were they eating before, right? If you were on a very heavy ketogenic diet before, already really low on carbs, and then you say, yeah, I went cold turkey into carnivore, you've already basically made that adaptation, right? So if you were eating a standard American diet or like a plant-based diet, these are so incredibly high in carbs. And I think giving your gut bacteria that chance to diminish in size while still having a viable food source, it just seems to be a much safer option. So that is how you start. That is my recommendation. What to eat on a carnivore diet. Now, this is eat what is delicious, right? There's a few kind of, rules we could start off with, all right? If it's a plant, don't eat it, okay? If it's artificial, don't eat it. I really don't think things like stevia and xylitol and all those things, they're obviously not natural. And I don't think we fully understand the complications of the effects they could have yet, okay? So no plants, nothing artificial, basically just nothing sweet. Honey is not carnivore. This isn't a video where I'm gonna talk about that. It's just how it is, all right? Now, I need to stress that one incredibly important thing to consider when starting this diet is you need to make it fun. You need to make it delicious, which is incredibly easy to do because you are literally only eating the tastiest foods on the planet, okay? The bacon and the eggs and the butter and the beef and the lamb and whatever you love, eat it and enjoy it, okay? Because it's really important to note that the only way any diet will ever be sustainable in the long term is if you keep doing it long term. And the only way to keep doing something long term is to be fully satisfied. So I think it's really important when you start this diet. Yeah, there's a few kind of hard rules. Don't eat plants. But like when it comes to the animal foods, eat what you love, okay? I recommend if you can and you're not suffering from any particular autoimmune condition or having any particular reactions, when you start this diet, go nuts. Likely, if you're anything like me, you've been avoiding these foods in high quantities for a long time. So I think it's going back to a carnivore diet, I think is one of the most satisfying experiences of my life, if I really think about it. Like now I'm kind of used to it, but it was good. Now I do want to point out that while all the animal foods are incredible and include them as you want, as you love them, the most perfect food for humans would be indisputably the meat and associated fat from large ruminant animals. So red meat, right? In other words, only eating vegans, animals that eat plants. And we see this kind of from our evolutionary past, right? Like we didn't become obligate hypercarnivores by hunting rabbits and chickens all day, all right? We became the species that we are today through hunting these beasts, these big megafauna in which we could secure this abundance of nutritious food for ourselves, for our family, for our tribe, okay? And in that way, red meat, like lamb, beef, bison, which is the best representation of that in modern day, in our modern day world, this is indisputably the most optimal food for humans. I would recommend if you're getting started on this diet to have fun with all the animal foods, go nuts, enjoy, indulge, okay? But I would say keep red meat the predominant source of your calories. It just seems to be the most biologically appropriate for humans, okay? And moving more into that, like another way we see this unfolding is the fact that people that are the most sick with the most severe autoimmune conditions, oftentimes, maybe that's yourself, oftentimes you can only function properly eating just red meat. It's unfortunate, but like, even though you're moving to an animal-based diet, that doesn't mean that you're free from any potential inflammatory responses from the food you're eating, okay? Things like poultry, like seafood, dairy, eggs, especially egg whites, these can all still have a potentially triggering response. Maybe you might need to move into a full elimination diet. So what that would look like is eating just red meat. And then once you find that baseline of how good you can feel eating just red meat, then you can start experimenting, bringing in a bit of butter or a bit of, trying egg yolks before whites. They seem to be a bit more favorable for most people. And you can see what foods seem to trigger you, which ones don't. And you basically just go from there. Another really important thing that I think has a lot of potential for not feeling very well on this diet is people not eating enough fat, okay? like I mentioned at the start, we have this bias that fat isn't good for us. Well, fat is incredibly important, and it is our fuel source on a carnivore diet. And so while at the store it might be difficult to find because everything is catered to the consumer that wants everything lean, eating enough fat is going to be very important. Eat the fat. If the fat tastes good, that means your body wants it. So honor that. And that's, diving into this last bit, which is that really trust your taste and start cultivating that intuition, okay? Because if something tastes particularly good, like you're very attracted to, seafood, for example, that likely means that there's something in that food that your body is really desiring. Like that's the beauty of how our system works. What tastes really good is going to be good for our bodies. This is abused because food is engineered in ways that it never was available naturally for us. But when you're just eating a carnivore diet, you can go back into that way of listening to your body. So, whatever it is, if it's liver, red meat, eggs, if your body's saying, oh, I really want that, it probably means you really need something in it. And conversely, if your body's saying, actually, I don't really crave that right now, listen to that and eat something else. Okay, so to wrap up this point, don't eat plants, don't eat anything artificial, no carbs, just stick to the animal foods kingdom. Have fun, indulge, eat tasty foods. If you are having sensitivities, listen to that. Maybe go baseline lion diet and start bringing in foods from there. Eat enough fat and listen to your body. It will tell you what it needs. Let's talk about calories. So calories are a bunch of bogus. Don't stress about them, all right? To me, the only advantage I see to having, it is sometimes useful to have this metric to compare what we're eating now to maybe what we used to, never to someone else, because that is a ridiculous thing to do. You are not them. But I think one of the common mistakes when you begin this diet is not eating enough. So potentially counting calories can be advantageous to make sure you are indeed eating enough. But another way to do that is to simply eat until you are full. All right? The idea of calories, counting them in general, is just, I think, a bit ludicrous. Like, do you see the gazelle in the savannah with his scales, weighing the grass? Like, no. And when you move back into a species-appropriate, optimal diet for humans, you can do the eating. You can do the eating intuitively. All right. And calories, and let's just break down calories more. So calories are actually a heat measurement. We don't eat calories. Calories are the heat measurement of the potential energy available in these compounds of fats and proteins. And for the purposes of this video, I'm going to exclude carbohydrates because while there is a nominal amount, let's just not worry about it for now. So let's talk about calories in, calories out, okay? This has been thoroughly debunked, and it is a bunch of bogus. Swapping out 500 grams of calories from protein for that of fat is not going to render the same energetic output from your body, okay? It is so much more nuanced than that, all right? It's going to depend on your hormones and your body composition, your activity levels, the functionality and robustness of your digestive system in general, okay? A great example of how we know that calories in, calories out is a bunch of crap is, okay, so for example, you can actually gain weight on a caloric deficit. Because your system is more nuanced than just calories in, calories out, your body could potentially say, we're being malnourished right now. We need to save these calories for the potential famine, right? And inversely, you can actually lose weight in a caloric surplus. It just goes to show how much more complex our body is than simply calories in, calories out, okay? So the way to know how many calories to eat in a day is to forget about calories. Just eat until you are full. The same as all animals do. It's almost as though our body is giving us perfect feedback as to how much food we should eat via our hunger signal, right? If meat still tastes good, keep eating it. When it stops tasting good, stop eating it. Relax about calories. Eat the meat, feel full, okay? Now, kind of in the same category as calories, let's just briefly touch on macros, because I know macros are an incredibly hot topic and something I was really not obsessed with, but really curious about when I started, okay? And this is the ratio of, like I said, I'm gonna exclude carbs for now because it's incredibly nominal, but the ratio of fat to protein. And again, this is gonna depend on your body composition, your goals, your activity levels, but let me just lay down some guidelines. Well, they're very vague guidelines, actually. I've seen people eat anywhere from 60-40, that being 60% fat, 40% protein. And for those of you guys that are new here, that's not meaning literally 60% of my plate is fat, but because the calories, there's more calories in a gram of fat than a gram of protein. Look into that if you want. But I've seen people eat from 60-40 all the way up to 90-10 or even 95-5, okay? And the only way to know what your body wants in terms of this ratio is to go by taste. If the fat tastes good, include more of it. If it doesn't, eat less of it. It's that simple. I mean, look, most people tend to fall into the 70-30, 80-20 spectrum. However, when I started, my body just wanted all the fat, and I was eating at least 90-10. I would eat my meal, and there was never enough fat in it. And then I would literally go to the fridge and eat spoonfuls of lard. And I know that might sound crazy, but that's just how malnourished my body was and how much it wanted fat, right? Now, another reason why you may choose to voluntarily lower your fat, even though it still is palatable at that high ratio, is if you're experiencing some symptoms, like having the runs, okay? Like I've mentioned, as you make this adaptation, your organ systems need to reprioritize their energy, and specifically your gallbladder, it needs to rebolster, okay? Because secreting bile to emulsify fat to be able to absorb the fat is essential. It needs to happen, or else that fat just goes through our system. So you may consider reducing your fat intake at the start, even though it is still delicious and palatable, to mitigate this symptom. But I'm going to dive more into that in the section later on in the video, because there's other ways you can kind of address this as well. But yeah, that's a reason why you may want to lower your fat. Another thing to add is make sure you're eating enough fat. Some people go into this diet with that lean bias that we need to eat lean. You feel crappy and you stop. Well, make sure you eat enough fat, all right? All of this is done at the level of the palate. What tastes good, eat, except for when you think you might be malabsorbing fat, and maybe this, you can look in the next section for how to mitigate this. So to wrap this up, I would say, don't stress. Utilize your hunger signals. Don't track your calories every day. Animals don't do this. Humans don't need to either. Eat what is delicious until you're full in the ratios of fat and protein that taste delicious. Okay, done. There you go. Perfect. Moving on.
What about breakfast?
We've already had it.
We've had one, yes. What about second breakfast?
How many meals should you eat per day, right? Some people are all for OMAD. Some people eat 3 meals a day or 2 meals a day or 2 meals and a snack, right? There's things like intermittent fasting, shortening that time-constricted eating window. There's all these different nuances. How do we make sense of it? So before I dive into what I think is optimal, I want to just point out, this idea of eating 3 meals a day is a relatively new social construct, okay? I find it fascinating and I want to learn more about it, but it seems to be birthed from times that humans were made to work much harder than any animal should ever have to, okay? Times of slavery, whether recognized as slavery or simply just abhorrent working conditions and hours for humans, right? The most recent being the Industrial Revolution, where it's we just had to eat that morning meal to have enough energy to sustain us for the insane working day. This is kind of how it was birthed into the mainstream. And as you can probably guess, I think this is absolute rubbish. Now, while we can see through fossilized evidence the dietary makeup of ancient humans, we can't ultimately know how many times they ate in the course of a day. However, I think it is very, very logical, and it's my personal belief that humans never would have eaten more than once or twice throughout the course of the day. All right, I think OMAD or OMAD plus a smaller meal, not two ginormous meals, makes the most sense as humans. However, I am not recommending that you start a carnivore diet striving to eat one meal a day, okay? There's a few points that you need to consider when deciding how many meals to eat per day, and I'll give you kind of my formula at the end of that. So number one is how readily your body is absorbing what you're putting in it, okay? A great example of this is fat not absorbing into your system, okay? This can be a reason to break up your meals, right? And just in general, having one ginormous meal may give your body less of an opportunity to fully absorb what you're giving it, okay? Whereas if you were really hungry and ate a small meal, you would probably absorb all of that because your body desperately wants it, right? Another point is to consider the post-eating slump, the lethargy that can sometimes follow a large meal, all right? This happens because the body is diverting its energy. It's literally diverting blood to our digestive system to digest this food, okay? So that's something else I would consider, and why I would never recommend eating more than one big meal till you are properly stuffed in a day, okay? And this is gonna be different for different people, right? Depending on your metabolism, your activity levels, you may find this slump lasts for 5 hours after you eat till you are stuffed, or you might find it lasts for an hour, okay? Everyone's gonna be different here, but that's a reason why, again, you may wanna split up your meals. Two other kind of minor points would be, one, if you don't have a gallbladder, that would obviously be a reason to split up your meals to give the secretion of bile directly from your liver more of an intermittent opportunity to do its thing, right? And one final thing to consider when making this call on how many meals to eat is, are you diabetic? Because having a large meal with a lot of protein can spike your insulin levels, so that's just something to be aware of, okay? Now, what I'm recommending is this. Consider everything I just said, and here's what to do. Only once per day should you eat a meal until you are absolutely full and totally satisfied. I like to do this either at lunchtime or at dinner time, depending on the makeup of my day. And then throughout the course of the day, whether before or after, fill in those gaps with as many smaller meals as you would like, as you see fit, okay? I would say maxing out at 4 total meals in a day. I think anything more than 4 is a bit ridiculous. But when you're, at the start adapting, this can be advantageous, okay? When I started this diet, I was eating 4 meals a day. I would have them at like 9, 12, 3, and 6, I think. But they were small meals, and I wouldn't have that full, happy, swollen belly feeling until the evening meal because I knew I was going to get lethargic, all right? This seemed to allow me to metabolize fat better. It reduced my symptomology that was problematic, and it helped me make this transition. That only lasted for a week, and then for months I did 3 meals a day, still following the same guidelines, only one big one, and then now I usually do 1 meal a day or 1 meal and still that smaller meal. Like, I think eating 2 meals a day is perfectly fine, especially if you are training at a high caliber or you're still, months in, you're still making up from that malnourishing period of life. But I think whether you're doing an OMAD or OMAD plus another smaller meal, it should always just be the one big meal, okay? And keep in mind, guys, the basic system here is so simple. Eat until you are full, and then don't eat again until you're hungry. When you're hungry, eat until you're full, rinse and repeat. My little caveat to that is consider having a smaller meal if you know you're gonna have more meals in the day, all right? OMAD is a great resting point on this diet that I think makes a lot of sense. However, it should not be forced. It should happen just naturally to the point where you just, I eat 1 meal a day and that feels great. Okay. Last thing I want to talk about on this subject is the idea of intermittent fasting, which by the generic understanding of it and why people practice it, beyond just the carnivore diet, it's usually thought of as beneficial because at the end of that fasting window, you get into that fat burning ketogenic state. Now, obviously, that serves no benefit in this diet because you're always in that state. However, I do think that intermittent fasting, OMAD being the holy grail of that with a 23-hour fasting window, can still be advantageous in that I don't think it's optimal to always be digesting. Like, yes, when you start this diet, have 2 or 3 or 4 meals in a day. But ultimately, that's going to make your eating window ginormous. And I think it's beneficial for the body to have time to digest and then a fasting window that is large enough for the body to kind of just have some time to rest. Like, I just do not think it's biologically appropriate to always be eating. And that's why I think 1 or 2 meals a day, having that restricted eating window to a point can be really beneficial, okay? It's funny, sometimes for your gut health, when you start, you need to eat 4 meals a day so your gut can handle it. But then later on, it makes more sense to eat 1 meal a day so your gut has that resting window, okay? I've really talked your ear off on this subject, but that is the entirety of all the nuances and how I see you having the best experience eating a carnivore diet. At the end of the day, like, just listen to your body. When you're hungry, eat, okay? It's so simple. Now, this is a really polarizing topic, all right? The idea of eating your meat raw versus eating it cooked. And for the record, I'm only really speaking about red meat here. I eat a lot of raw red meat, beef, lamb, etc. I'd be very hesitant to dive into chicken or pork in the raw fashion, and I'm not really recommending that. I'm sure it's possible, but I don't think it's ideal. And then obviously, yeah, there's fish as well, sashimi, etc. That's good as well. But yeah, so there's 3 main camps that I see emerge here. Camp number 1 are the people that are they think the only way forward to really be on a carnivore diet is to be on a raw carnivore diet. It's like, oh wow, you burn your meat, you savage. Like, you're missing out on all the vitamins that are being denatured. And yes, there is some truth to that. I'll dive into that in a sec. But yeah, you have your people that are obsessed with raw carnivore. Cool. Then you have camp number 2, which I would say is where I sit, which is kind of like, yeah, within the spectrum of these animal foods, this diet, I think including cooked and raw food is great. And I personally enjoy both. In fact, I do actually favor a lot of raw red meat specifically, and probably eat like 50-50. Like, when I have a steak, I swear 90% of it's raw. The middle, rare steak, the inside, that's raw meat, okay? And then you have the third camp, which is the majority of the world that probably think anyone that eats raw meat is absolutely nuts. Things like the talk about pathogens, E. coli, salmonella, just you're nuts, you eat raw meat, okay? Which is instantly kind of thrown out because 1, like, just think of a steak, that's raw meat in the middle. But 2, while I'm not going to give a hard stance on this topic, I think both are great. One of the reasons we actually can know definitively that we are hypercarnivores is that we can eat raw meat. We can, and we digest it very well. This is why we know plants aren't optimal, because when you remove the fanciful cooking processes, we can't eat raw plants. Whereas meat, we actually, the best evidence shows we actually started our meat-based journey from eating raw meat, from scavenging, okay? So I want to dispel that this is a taboo subject at all. We can absolutely eat raw meat. Now, do you need to? Look, this isn't based on any particular scientific literature, but I personally believe that a diet that consists of entirely cooked meat could not possibly be as ideal as the inclusion of some raw meat. However, this is purely conjecture. It's just kind of a feeling that I have. If we look at the work of Weston Price, whose work I'm a big fan of, all the indigenous groups he studied all had a balance of cooked and raw meat. And even someone that does eat all cooked meat, does anyone really have their steak well done? I think that's a bit of psychopathic trait. I'm sorry if I offended anyone. It's not very common, okay? So whether you favor raw or cooked meat in your diet, there certainly are some trade-offs. Like, it is true that certain vitamins are denatured to some capacity when you cook your meat. However, the trade-off seems to be that protein is more easily digestible. And, for the record, if you were eating a plant-based diet and you just brought in fully cooked meat, you would no doubt experience health benefits. So I think for that reason, we can't say there's any problem with cooked meat. I'm not trying to land myself in any cult here. I really do think both are incredible. Just eat the meat, okay? But one person who I think raw meat could be even more advantageous for is someone that has a bit weaker digestion, all right? Because what we do know, there was this experiment done, the frog experiment, where he takes the cooked frog and the raw frog and puts it in a substitute of stomach acid. And you can see that the raw frog, the enzymes in its flesh seem to break down itself. Like, we know that raw meat digests a bit more efficiently. Now, that being said, cooked meat still digests absolutely fine. But what I noticed in my own experience is that when I favored more raw meat, especially when I was adapting, my gut did seem to digest better. My stools were better. All in all, I felt more energized. I have personally always favored a bit more raw meat in my diet. So yeah, I think to wrap up this point, don't be stressed either way. And like I'm always going to reference back to, this is yet another opportunity to simply listen to your body, okay? If there's something your body seems to want from raw meat that it's not getting cooked, then it will tell you that, and raw meat will become more palatable. So again, the feedback you get from your body is the golden ticket to make sure you never have any problems on this diet, because you're always going to be attracted to what your body needs to be most nourished and most healthy, okay? That is my take on cooked and raw meat. All right, let's get to know each other, guys. If there's one thing that I truly, truly missed when I was so sick eating all those plants, it was surfing. Oh, how I've missed it. These photos are actually a bit old and not of particularly good surfing either, but I felt like I had to throw something in here to break up just the monotony of my incessant rambling about eating meat. So here we are. Anyways, let me know in the comments what joys eating proper human food has afforded you. I'd love to hear. Anyways, back to the video. All right, so we've basically covered what to eat on this diet, when to eat, how to eat it, all of that stuff, all right? So now I want to dive into the symptomology that is pretty common for people to experience, okay? There's a variety of symptoms that seem to come up on a pretty regular basis, and I'm gonna address them, okay? Starting with what I think is the most common, it happens a lot, and that is diarrhea. Loose stools are a very common symptom to experience when transitioning to a carnivore diet. And a lot of this has to do with fat. But before I dive into how you can maneuver around the fat to digest a bit easier, I do want to point out as well that in addition to fat, any foods that are still giving you an inflammatory response, like maybe you're triggered by things like eggs or seafood or dairy, that can also lead to diarrhea. So don't forget about that side of the coin, okay? But when it comes to fat, it's very common for the body to be malabsorbing fat. And when your body doesn't release enough bile to emulsify the fat, to be able to absorb it, it basically moves through your system and manifests as loose stools. Okay, so there's a few things we can do here to mitigate this, all right? Number one would be spacing out your meals. And I've alluded to this earlier, but what this does is it gives your body a more the limitation of what bile you have access to at any given time. When you eat these incremental meals, it may be enough for that one meal. However, if you ate tons of fat in the one sitting, that's when you might run out and, again, manifest loose stools, okay? Still on that same kind of topic, you could just consider reducing your fat entirely, which kind of sucks, especially if you're just getting started and it is very palatable. You want to eat all the fat. If the runs are really messing with your life, then maybe just consider reducing fat in general, okay? Another point regarding fat is consider having your fats more raw as opposed to rendered, okay? Things like raw beef fat, maybe even raw butter, raw egg yolks, as opposed to lard and tallow and these rendered fats, okay? It might even mean you cook your ground beef and you don't pour the grease back on top, which I know we want to, but this does seem to have a very real effect. In my own experience, switching to eating raw fats, and actually, like if you're eating ground beef and you want to eat, and it's very fatty and you want to eat raw fat, you kind of just need to eat the ground beef raw itself. And that's what actually led me to eating more raw meat in my diet. And the whole transformation really helped my overall gut metabolism, and my poops responded really well, okay? And to me, this makes a lot of sense from an evolutionary perspective, because we've been cooking our meat for hundreds of thousands of years. We know this, but odds are we weren't particularly cooking our fats. Like, yes, there would be associated fat with the meat that would be cooked as well, right? But we would never just cook fat, because if you cook fat over a fire, it's just gonna disappear, all right? And I know from personal experience that like cold fat from the fridge, if you just eat it like butter, it is so good. So from this evolutionary perspective, it makes sense that we would have favored, yes, we would have had cooked meats, but we would have always favored raw, less rendered fats. And the inclusion or swap to this in your diet, I think will make a very big difference in the ability to have a good, solid poop again, okay? Next symptom I wanna talk about is nausea. And I mean, for nausea, everything I just mentioned about the runs, about diarrhea, that still stands, because they're usually paired together, and all of that and the lack of having diarrhea can benefit not having nausea as well. However, I want to bring in two more points if you are experiencing really bad nausea. So we know that when you switch to a low carbohydrate or zero carb diet, the lack of insulin, it triggers your kidneys to excrete more fluid, which in turn excretes electrolytes. So what often happens on this diet is we become low on electrolytes, and that can cause that lightheaded, even nauseous feeling. As well, if you're having the runs, that can further expel electrolytes. So either supplementing with electrolytes is a possibility, or just salting your food more heavily, okay? These are two ways that you can kind of mitigate nausea potentially, all right? The only other point I would make here, and this is something I didn't learn anywhere else, I actually just found it in my own experience, but it makes sense, hear me out, is not necessarily drinking less water, but drinking water more intermittently, or better said, not just like chugging water in one go. Because if you chug tons and tons of water, more than your system can handle, your body, your kidneys are gonna be forced to excrete that water, and therefore excrete more electrolytes. So one way to lose electrolyte is to drink a huge amount of water in one sitting, okay? And if you, like, this is something that I was really surprised made a big difference in my experience. I was having the runs, having some nausea, and when I started just, sipping my water slowly over the course of the day, I noticed a dramatic uptake in my body's lack of nausea, lack of feeling crappy. So, yeah, those are all my tips and tricks for kind of nausea, diarrhea, and how they all go together. And even salting your food, electrolytes, that's gonna be beneficial for the runs as well, because you're gonna be losing electrolyte there, okay? So the opposite side of the spectrum would be constipation. And I do wanna point out with constipation that many people think they're constipated, but in reality, they're not, okay? So if your only symptoms are that you are going to the bathroom to do number 2 less frequently and your stools are noticeably smaller, otherwise, everything's great. If you went to the doctor and you said, yeah, I go to the bathroom less and my poops are smaller, if that's all you could say, then odds are you're not constipated. You're just absorbing your food, which is like what humans are meant to do. It's so funny, we think we need to eat all this fiber, these plants, but plant is a waste product. And what it does is it bulks up our stools because it is not digested. So we have these ginormous poops more often because we can't do anything with this stuff. Whereas when you eat an animal-based optimal human diet, you absorb so much more of what you're eating, and therefore your stools become less frequent and smaller in size. Now, Don't get me wrong, you can still be constipated. If you are experiencing discomfort or very hard stools, then these are actual signs of constipation. And the remedy is quite simple. Basically, just eat more fat. In the same way that diarrhea can be resolved by reducing fat, what happens is excess fat in your system will be expelled and manifest as diarrhea. However, if you don't have enough fat in your diet, then every bit of fat is absorbed as you're digesting, and there's nothing left to lubricate your stools as they come out. So your stools become a great sort of barometer of how much fat is in your diet and whether you should be adding fat or removing fat. So constipated, try adding more fat. Next, let's talk about, I guess, like the keto flu, which is a standard terminology for kind of that slump you might feel as your body is making its changes to this, adapting to a new fuel source. And there isn't really much advice I'm going to give here. I would say, yes, supplementing with electrolytes or salting your food a bit heavier can help with some of the effects, a lot of that being loss of electrolytes and the symptoms that manifest because of that. But otherwise, I would say just give it time. Like you might experience some things. You are changing the biochemistry of how your organ systems are working. All right. So give your body some grace, give it some time, eat a bit more salt, follow all the other things I said above or before, wherever that is, and just give it a week or two. I think most people, myself included, between 1 and 2 weeks is all you need to be fully, well, not fully, but predominantly fat adapted and feeling incredible again. Okay. So the last symptom that I want to address is a pretty important one, and that is cravings, okay? Because I've been saying throughout the course of this video, you need to listen to your body, but what is a craving and what is actually listening to what your body wants, okay? Because the man who quits heroin, a week later, the body says, I kind of want some more heroin, And I think it's really important to consider that these cravings around sugar predominantly, around carbohydrates, are not just cravings, they are an addiction. Like we are addicted to sugar because throughout the history of us as a species, we've never had access to sugar like we do now, okay? 99% of the food in the grocery store was unheard of for the last many millennia of our existence as a species. Even the fruits and vegetables weren't existing, okay? Like for example, yes, humans millions or let's say hundreds of thousands of years ago, if they found wild strawberries, they would eat them and they'd be delicious, great. But wild strawberries are these tiny things, okay? We have engineered food to be sweeter and bigger and essentially more addictive, okay? So when you're starting a carnivore diet, I've said in other videos, like there's no award for the best carnivore of the year, the most strict adherent carnivore, okay? We're doing this diet to feel optimal, right? So at some point, if you want to experiment and bring in some plant, some blueberries, some whatever, if you want to do that and you feel good doing it, that's absolutely fine, okay? But I think it's really important when you start this diet to give yourself 60 to 90 days, all right? That's what Dr. Sean Baker recommends, and I think this is crucial so you can actually give your body and your palate time to adjust. And in doing so, after 90 days, you might say, I could incorporate this other little thing and that's fine, whatever. Okay, great. But if you're doing that a week in, that's not your body's intuition speaking, that's your addiction speaking. So I think it's really important to adhere to, once you get to that cold turkey point, you're just carnivore, I think adhere to these guidelines for 60 to 90 days, beat your cravings, and then you can think clearly again. When I started eating this way, a week or two in, I was like, I could really go for a fresh coconut. So I'm living here in Bali and it's hot and sometimes you want that kind of fresh juiciness, right? But I stuck it through. And now what's funny is, and I had cravings for other things too. Maybe there's so many tasty treats in all the cafes here. And I thought, maybe I'll eat a carnivore diet with a bit of a dirty carnivore diet. But I'm so glad that I gave my body that grace period because after a couple months, I realized I actually don't crave those things anymore. And I am totally contented to just eat the meat, the fatty meat. And yeah, like it's incredible how fast your body will overcome those cravings. So stick with it. And yeah. All right, so we've talked about food, we've talked about potential symptomology. Now let's dive into just a few more of these kind of nuanced topics. All right, starting with supplements. Do you need to take supplements on a carnivore diet? And the short answer here is no. Obviously not. Do no animals in nature take supplements? Okay, the reason we know that this is optimal for humans is because it doesn't require any supplementation, because we get everything we need from the foods that we eat. Now, again, like I mentioned at the start, we've all come to this diet from unique points in the health spectrum. So I'm not going to say it's a blanket rule that you don't need to supplement. However, I couldn't give you this advice right now because it's going to depend on your unique digestion, your biochemistry, your body. But as a general rule, as you move back into this diet, you shouldn't need to supplement. You should be able to get everything you need from high quality animal products, okay? Now, personally, I do take a supplement, but it's not a supplement in the traditional sense of excess vitamins and minerals, which we all know is just, well, you've probably heard, it's just a recipe to have expensive pee, right? The supplement I take is a nutraceutical, and it's a stem cell supplement. So what it does is it upregulates the release of adult stem cells into your bloodstream, okay? And adult stem cells are phenomenal little buggers. They're able to become nearly any cell in the body, and therefore are able to repair and renew damaged and diseased tissue. It's kind of like cranking up the fountain of youth a little bit, if you will, all right? And the thing is, with age, our body's ability to release these adult stem cells, we always have tons of them, but our ability to release them diminishes. And therefore, with age, but also with stress, our body isn't able to repair itself. And that's why we age, but it's also why we experience a lot of degenerative disease, because our bodies don't have the ability to fix what's going on. And so as we increase the concentration of stem cells circulating in our bloodstream, we're also increasing the ability for these stem cells to be repairing and renewing and targeting damaged and diseased tissues to keep us young, keep us healthy. So obviously, I'm recommending that you get your hands on this stuff as soon as you possibly can, okay? I mean, I don't sponsor much stuff in this space, because I think all you need to be healthy is do things like eat a carnivore diet, touch the earth every day, get in the sun, simple things. However, this is an incredible little biohacking opportunity. And what this stuff is able to do in the body, I know it's not a very scientific term, but it's magic. What it does is incredible. So if I were you, right after this video, there are links down below. And hey, don't get me wrong, watch the rest of the video first, but there's links down below. You can get your hands on this stuff, and reach out if you have any questions and want to chat about it as well. I'm happy to talk about it. So I guess the gist here is, don't stress about traditional supplementation. For the most part, it's really not necessary on a carnivore diet. However, there could be nuances, like it really depends on you and your own specific body. However, definitely jump on the opportunity to upregulate your adult stem cells. They facilitate absolute magic in the body. And I think, why would you not want to support the health of your body in all ways you possibly can, okay? Okay, moving on. Organ meats. Do I need them? And if so, how much is important? All right. This is a fun topic because you have these charlatans in the community that are saying, oh, eat all the organ meats. Every day you got to eat your testicle and your liver and your pancreas and your kidney and your heart and your lung and your toe and your testicle. I think I said that. But I think that can be a little bit misleading, okay? My understanding is this. The absolute minimum requirement you need of organ meats in your diet on a pure carnivore diet is 0. It's absolutely none at all, okay? We know this because, well, for a few reasons. Like anecdotally, there are people living today that haven't eaten organ meats in years. Someone like Dr. Anthony Chaffee, for example. I think I remember him saying in the last 5 years, he can count the times he's eaten organ meats on one hand, and I think 2 hands for his entire lifetime, all right? And he's still alive. So you kind of need to throw out the bias that it is absolutely necessary, okay? Indigenous groups like the Inuit, they weren't really able to eat organ meats because of the hyper toxic levels of vitamin A, for example, in the organ meats of these sea mammals, right? And I did get a comment on a prior video saying how that's not a good example because, you know, other indigenous groups did eat organ meats. And that's fair enough, but like if you look at, for example, everyone refers to the Hadza. They do eat a lot of organ meat. Great, but they're also living in a part of the world where their territory, their terrain is getting smaller and smaller, and the animals they have access to is becoming more and more limited. So they're not they don't have an abundance of opportunity to just eat fatty muscle meat, okay? And I think this is not how humans evolved in our most natural and ideal circumstances, okay? So bottom line is, from everything I've seen, you don't actually need organ meats. You don't need them, all right? However, I do want to point out that they are an incredible source of nutrition. And if you have a taste for them and your body's saying, we want that, then by all means, eat organ meats. All I'm trying to point out in this little section here is that, like, you don't need to go nuts on them, okay? Eat them as much as you want them. And if you're anything like me, when you're starting this diet, you're gonna crave them. Like, I was so malnourished. And when I was getting into this and I would have a plate for dinner, if I didn't have a little piece of liver or kidney or heart were the big 3 that I went for, I would feel a bit deprived, like I wasn't getting everything that I needed. And I really liked it. Not a whole lot, but enough. And then over time, as I seemed to catch up on this nutrient content in my body, my taste for it started to diminish. And now this is an important point. When your taste for organ meats has diminished and you don't actually have any craving for them, that isn't a sign that you need to start taking a desiccated supplement, okay? That's a sign that your body doesn't want that nutrient, okay? You know, it's really interesting. Plant fiber, we actually know that it inhibits nutrient absorption in our body. That was actually, I believe, why fiber was coined in the 60s or 70s as a weight loss remedy, because it specifically blocked the absorption of the food you were eating. An absolute ridiculous idea. But if you think about our human diets, like these hunter-gatherers that did favor more organs, they were still eating more survival foods, including plant fibers. And so I want to point out, if you're on a carnivore diet, but maybe you're not. Maybe you're eating a hypercarnivore diet, meaning that you do include some plant matter in your diet. It may be more beneficial for you to include a little bit more organ meats. But again, like, it's still going to come down to taste. I guess what I'm suggesting is you may find yourself craving them more because your body is less readily absorbing nutrients, so you're going to want to have more in your diet. All right. But still, the last point I want to cover is that whatever the context is of your diet and your taste for organ meats, always consider the ratio of what was actually available to humans in a biological evolutionary sense. Okay. And what I mean by that is one animal has one liver. Okay. So to have a diet that's, you know, exuberantly high in heart and liver and kidney, you know, as opposed to muscle meat, that's not evolutionarily consistent. And I don't think in the long term, the excess and the toxicity that can accumulate of vitamins, vitamin A, can kill you in high doses. I don't think that makes any sense, okay? So if you do simple math, a cow, when slaughtered and all dressed, is, I think, about maybe say 500 pounds of like muscle meat and associated fat, 500 pounds of edible sustenance, okay? 10 pounds of that is liver, okay? So if you do some simple math, that's about 2%, which is to say that for every kilo of meat you eat, you could have about 20 grams of liver, or every pound, like a half ounce kind of thing, or no, sorry, a quarter ounce. And I think no matter where you are in the terms of this diet, you should always adhere to those ideas, because we wouldn't have had access to these in larger proportions. And, you know, there's some account to show that these indigenous groups didn't eat certain organs at all, and they would give them to the dogs kind of thing. So at the end of the day, like I sound like a broken record, listen to your body, listen to your palate. If it tastes good, have it, but always limit it to that natural ratio, okay? That's organ meat. So the last thing I want to touch on, and it's one of the last frontiers in the carnivore space, is salt. And salt is heavily debated because while most people on a carnivore diet do salt their food, and I do want to chime in, it can be very advantageous when you're making this adaptation because of the loss of electrolyte, like I've mentioned. Traditionally in nature, carnivorous animals don't seek out salt, all right? Herbivores seek out salt, and carnivores eat the herbivores and get all the salt, the sodium that they need from the tissue of that animal, right? Now, that being said, humans are a very unique carnivore amongst all the other carnivorous species, right? So I think it's okay to accept that there are some nuances here. And like, I mean, I guess the hard fact is this. Sodium is essential. It is crucial for nerve and muscle function in our body. Judy from Nutrition with Judy refers to them as the spark plugs of the body, right? Salt is actually sodium is even imperative for hydration to allow water into cells. Now, I keep saying sodium because yes, sodium is imperative. Salt, however, is not. Did our ancient ancestors 100,000 years ago have access to salt? I would say likely not. So really, just do whatever you want, okay? Salt your food if you want, don't salt it if you want. When you're starting this diet, consider adding a bit more salt to manage a loss of electrolytes, but then at some point, consider removing salt and see how you fare with it, okay? I think it is more evolutionarily consistent. However, this is also gonna depend on the nutrient content of said animal. You know, a cow, the sodium content or any mineral or nutrient content in an animal is going to depend on the pasture it was raised, the quality of the soil. You know, in my own experience, I've eaten meat that I felt needed heavy salting. And then later on, I've eaten meat that I thought, this doesn't need any salt at all. And it tastes exactly perfect for my palate. So I would say, you know, start with some salt, but don't like be afraid of experimenting going without salt. You know, people like Bella, the steak and butter gal, as well as Dana Spencer, who was on an interview with Kelly Hogan. If you look up those names, you can see their interview. She's been salt-free for like 10 years, and she looks great. She's feeling great on it. So evolutionarily, I don't think it is consistent. But then again, these large megafauna might have had a much richer salt content in their flesh, you know? So it's very hard to understand. I think salt your food if you like, try it without, but don't get caught up in there's these forums I've looked in and people seem to think salt is the solution to everything. You got some leg cramps, salt your food. You got a headache, salt your food. You got menstrual cramps, salt your food. You're too short, salt your food. You know, it seems to be this panacea, and I don't think I think people just put too much thought into it, like I'm doing right now. Use some salt if you want. That's all I'll say. Whew, okay. That is the video. That is my answer to all the most common questions that I get asked on a nearly daily basis, okay? And I really hope that this has given you some clarity to move forward and be able to take this advice, these guidelines, and then apply it to your own unique situation, all right? If I had to name 3 of probably the biggest mistakes on this diet, I would say 1 would be adapting cold turkey, going overnight. Big no-no for most people. 2 would be not eating enough, you know, or not eating enough fat, not eating enough, just giving into those biases that are stuck in our brain and having a hard time thinking freely and eating to that proper level of intuition. And number 3 would be quitting too soon, right? It's gonna take some time. Give your body some grace. You've been using it incorrectly for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, however old you are. So give it time to adapt. Don't give in to those cravings while you're still an addict. Give it 60 to 90 days and really feel the benefit of what it can feel like to eat an optimal human diet. Because if you're just starting this, like, I am so excited for your experience and how good you're going to feel in the next weeks, months, and years, from what I've heard from everyone else. I'm just frothing and I'm only 6 months in. So the last thing I do want to say before I wrap up this whole video is do remember that there's more to living a healthy life than just diet. I mean, diet and eating a carnivore diet, I think, is a very big piece of the puzzle, but it's not the only piece, all right? Things like getting in the sun, like touching the earth every day, grounding, like optimizing your sleep, like upregulating your adult stem cells if you have the opportunity to do so, which you do. There's links down below. Just be goofy, be stress-free, live a good life, and practice what it is to be a human, diet being a big piece, okay? If you want to get in touch with me, you want to actually work with me one-on-one, gets a little bit of extra support, and just have someone in your corner. Like, I know what it feels like to be ill, and I understand the secrets to health at this point, and I'm sure I can help you move towards that direction. So feel free. There's links down below for everything I've spoken about. Yeah, that's all. Now, go eat some meat.